Hey there, everybody. Thank you for joining my channel, The Magical Solution. My name is Lailani, and this is how we grow. I am so excited tonight because we are welcoming back one of our Latino brothers who wrote his second book, and we all remember him from American Brujeria, but this time we got The Witch's Guide to the Paranormal: How to Investigate, Communicate, and Clear Spirits. You guys, when I tell you this is the book you must have in your library, I legit mean it. And we'll explain why in just a moment. But before we bring him in case you did not already know, J. Allen Cross is a practicing witch of Mexican, Native American, and European descent whose craft was shaped by his Catholic upbringing and mixed family culture. Living in his home state of Oregon, he works as a psychic medium and occult specialist for a well-known paranormal investigation team out of the Portland metro area. And when he's not investigating, he enjoys providing spells and potions to his local community, exploring haunted and abandoned places, working as a consultant for other workers and investigators, and of course, writing about witchcraft and the paranormal. So without further ado, let's just bring him on.
Hello, very happy to be here. I'm so glad you got your copy too.
Yes, it is so good as usual. Listen to me when I tell you. Okay, not only did I enjoy American Brujeria because it was so well written, it was easily to digest, but this is sort of in the same format in that it gives just tons and tons of definitions, tons and tons of stories. Like it just makes it so easy to read, so relatable, and so accessible. Like you can just say to yourself, okay, I want to look up this particular thing about the paranormal, and you could just flip right to the page and it's perfect, it's concise. You did amazing with this book once again.
Thank you so much. I was really hoping that it was just kind of be something that people could just carry around with them and just whenever they needed. Like I always think of my books as like if someone ever needed to talk to me and they needed to carry me around in their bag,
Yes.
how would this be? So
Yes, and it legit is a field guide. So one of the things that I noticed in here is it isn't just about paranormal investigations. You did an amazing job to really incorporate the psychic mediumship phenomenon and like kind of honed in a little bit on that particular worker of the team, if you will, the investigative team. And I found that to be so helpful because when we talk about paranormal investigations, you're talking about a team, and you did a great job breaking that down here.
thank you so much. It was one of those things where when I wrote this book, I knew that I wanted to talk about, paranormal investigation. And a lot of people think going into this book that I'm going to be talking about, specifically like the tech equipment and EVPs and things like that. And that is
Which you
something that I
did. You
do
did
go
cover
over.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just because I want people to kind of know the language. Sometimes when you get with paranormal investigators, it sounds like they're speaking just something completely different.
Right.
And so I wanted to kind of cover paranormal investigation, give people a groundwork for, how that works. But at the same time, I think it's so important to incorporate mediumship in paranormal
Yes.
investigation because it's like, you can learn all the tricks for traveling, but do you speak the language where you're going? Like, that's very important. So, communication is really the backbone of this work if you're going to actually help any of the spirits. So, I wanted to really go over, mediumship, give people some guides how to get started. I even teach people how to hack mediumship a little bit with like pendulum dowsing. So if you're like, I don't think I can do that, we're going to give you like training wheels and then,
Right.
you can work into it. So I wanted to cover that. And then, of course, the witchcraft portion too. So I wanted everyone to feel like, okay, we have the ground, we have the framework, and then now we're
Yes, you
going to talk
touched on a
about the
little bit of
actual process.
everything. I
Yeah.
absolutely adored it, and I also loved the fact that, like, I'm gonna say this. This is going to definitely be one of those prerequisites for my psychic mediumship classes that I teach. So this is
Mhm.
definitely going to be on the reading list now that I've gotten it and I've read it and reviewed it. I think it's perfect. But I think another piece too that I found really great about your book is you also talk a lot about there's a whole section in I believe chapter 4 where you talk about the ethics of paranormal investigation. You don't just, I mean, yes, you get into the machinery, you get into the team and what each member's role is, you get
Mhm.
into psychic mediumship and kind of working the skills with that. But then you get into something that I feel, okay, so I'm an OG, all right, and there's going to be a lot of OGs in the chat. And so I need you tonight to convince us, to talk to us, to explain to us some of the experiences that we've gone and kind of held on to. And one of those is, and you cover this in your ethics, but one of those is this idea of sort of coming in, engaging with the spirits, and then just fucking leaving, just leaving. And so I'm wondering, since you said that communication is kind of like the backbone of you know, the paranormal investigation, can you talk us through why stuff, like, what's up with that, and is that normal?
Right, and that's something I really wanted to try and battle with this book. And so many witches that I spoke to really were under the impression that paranormal investigation, that there's all this problematic stuff with it, and I don't disagree. There is some kind of behavioral issues, but I think that the solution to it is to, or the magical solution, if you will, is to be the change that we wish to see. Witches have this wonderful ability to be ambassadors between the living and the dead. And
Yes.
something that bothers me so much about paranormal investigation is, and kind of the reason why I wrote this book and why I do what I do, is because people started contacting me from out of state, and they'd be like, "Oh, like I have this sort of paranormal activity going on. Can you help me?" And I'm like, "Well, I can't because you're in like Maine on the other side of the country. But let me, contact your local paranormal group and have them go and help you." And the response I would get from their local paranormal groups, and I've contacted many of them over the course of the several years, if I got any response at all, was, "We can't do anything to help, but we'd love to come take photos."
Oh my
And I'm
gosh.
like, then what are we doing here? Like what
Right.
then what kind of service are we offering? Who are we
I mean, it's
helping
at
here?
this point, it's almost being done just as a data collection activity versus actually serving the spirits and serving the people who this may be affecting.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so I'm like, the last thing that a family that is terrified needs is for someone to come in and go on safari in their house and then just leave.
Right.
And I think too, we do a disservice when, we've all seen those moments when, a paranormal investigation team gets an EVP, like a really clear EVP, that's like a small child saying, like, "I'm scared, can you help me?" And they're like, "That's great, bye." And I'm like, no, 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 no,
Yeah.
no, no, no. We gotta go back. We gotta go back.
Jeez.
But I find that a lot of paranormal investigators just simply don't know how. They don't even
Mhm.
know where to start, or that they can do anything to help. I think that they just think that, like, oh, that's just a thing that I don't have any sway over. And so I'm like, I have to get this information out there because we can help. We can, make a difference. We can actually you know, be a change in the paranormal community and actually serve the spirits respectfully and help the people
Exactly.
who are alive who are scared to death right now.
Right. And you did a great job too describing, you know, different types of hauntings, different types of spirits that may occupy a space or even a person or an object, and you know how to sort of observe them, how to work with them. And you said something in the book that I felt was just such a beautiful phrase, and it is counseling the spirits. This idea of working with them, and it is so true because when you kind of take up the mantle of being a psychic medium or someone who works with the dead, what you're really saying is like you're someone who listens to them and works with them, and in a
Mhm.
sense you're almost like their personal therapist. Have you ever come across a situation where the spirits themselves do not want to leave, or the people whom the spirit's home occupies doesn't want them to leave? And what do you do in those situations?
Absolutely, absolutely. I find a lot of the times that spirits, especially ones that know that they're dead, are hanging around for a reason. They have their personal reasons. Usually, it's something like, "Oh, well, I would like to wait for this family member," or "I'm watching over like my grandkids," or sometimes it's like, you know what, I buried something under this tree and I do not want anybody else to find it. So like you have to kind of listen to them and be like, okay, like what is happening here? What are your personal reasons for being here? And then see if you can help them still find their way to the other side, somewhere where they're going to be safer. Maybe there's some things that you can explain to them as well.
Yes.
So for instance, a lot of the time spirits that know that they're dead are choosing to stay here because they've been told that based on something that they've done that they're going to hell. So
Mm.
usually these are people who have caused their own death on purpose, and they're very concerned. They're like, well, now I have to be stuck here because if I go over there, I'm getting sent to hell. And you have to kind of like explain with them, you have to build trust with them
Yes.
that, you're not going to hell. That's not really a thing, because in my experience, they can go through the light and then come back over and visit. And so when I walk them through the light and then they come back and they're like, actually, no, there is no hell over there.
Yeah.
And that's something that's really kind of healing for them to figure out. So you do have to build this kind of sense of trust and rapport with them, and kind of sit with them a lot of time, especially if you have to tell them that they're dead.
Mm.
That can be pretty jarring for somebody.
Yeah.
A lot of the times though, they kind of have this big light bulb moment of like, oh, that makes sense now that you
Yeah.
say it. But being a safe person to sit there with them through that.
Yeah.
I have run across times in which I've been at a facility where they're either making money off of the spirits or whatever, where they don't want anything crossed over.
Mm-hmm.
I have mixed feelings, because I like to respect other people's spaces. At the same time, if I go into a space and there's a spirit that's really like, look, you got to get me out of here, I'm not going to turn them down because somebody's making money off of it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um, that being said, I ran into instances though where both is happening. So I got the chance to investigate the Montgomery House in Washington, which is a very famous haunted location.
Nice.
It is now a private residence, but they have opened it up for investigations that you can pay to investigate or pay to take a tour. And when I went there, there was this main spirit there who used to own the house named Ruth, and she ran it as a B&B in life, and then now in death, she was still running it as a B&B, but for dead folk. And
What?
she was not at all interested in moving on. She was like, nope, this is my home. And that's why it was so full of spirits, is because spirits who needed a place to stay were coming and staying in the home. And she was watching over them, making sure that they all minded their manners and everything like that. And so she was running a business on the other side. And I was
What?
like, you good? And she's like, I am good. And I'm like, okay, great. So we're just gonna leave it there. So yeah.
Dead
I
rentals. Dead rentals.
oh, hi, Wendy. Hello. Absolutely.
Oh my God. Now, now, have you ever experienced, and maybe not in the paranormal investigative community slash crowd, but maybe sort of the outliers, the people who sort of, psychic mediums who may kind of dabble in paranormal investigation. Have you ever gotten feedback in terms of there's no such thing as ghosts, specifically ghosts that have been traumatized or ghosts that are haunting? Have you ever gotten that kind of feedback, and what would you say in those situations?
I found that a lot of people have very strange ideas about ghosts. And I guess I can't judge, because a lot of this paranormal stuff is based around personal experience for everyone. We all
Right.
have our own kind of different experience of it. So I have had people who are very big names in the field of paranormal say that ghosts aren't actually real. They're all just stuff that comes from our brains. Which again, I'm like, then why are you here? But
Right.
then I've also had other people too who are very adamant. And this is something I come across mostly with witches, and to be honest, mostly with witches who don't do paranormal investigation, are
Mhm.
often very adamant that paranormal investigation is rude because we're bothering the spirits, and that all spirits are perfectly content where they are and do not need any sort of help, do not need any whatever. Um, and for me, someone who grew up as a medium and spent most of my childhood, adolescence, teen years being bombarded with spirits going, hey, I need you to do something for me. I need you to do something for me. Can you call somebody? Can you tell Aunt Tilly the will is in the closet? Like, they really want the communication. They really need to have that access to be able to reach out. And so I do think it's very important that we give them that opportunity through paranormal investigation. I would like there to be a little bit more follow through once we actually receive those messages from them. So that is a thing. And also too, some schools of mediumship get very adamant that there's no such thing as negative or harmful spirits. There's no such thing as trapped spirits. There's no such thing as spirits in distress or spirit trauma. And I understand why that belief is important and central to what they do, because that is a safety and a protection thing, but that does not mean that it is correct. And
Correct.
so we have different schools of mediumship that will often get very firm about their beliefs in that.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I can definitely attest to that as well. I've done, a few videos on, suicide spirits and spirits
Mhm.
who are quote unquote disabled, the ones who were disabled in life and who passed over. And the lashback that I got was severe. And I understood. I mean, it's coming from a place of, oh, well, my family member committed suicide, or, oh, my father was disabled. So of course it hits home that you don't want to think that when they cross over, they're still like that. They're still in that space, at least some of them. And
Yeah.
so, it's hard for people to sort of wrap their mind around that, because you think death is sort of the shedding of suffering. And that's not always the case, unfortunately. And that's why there is such a thing as psychic mediums and people who literally give therapy to the dead.
Mhm.
So, I find that you really don't hold back when it comes to a lot of these different types of hauntings, whether they're egregores or thought forms, or whether they're residual. You cover it all, and it's just so refreshing. Now, getting back to some of these ethics, when we talk about disturbing the spirits, right? When you were saying some of these adamant adversaries, if you will, really feel like we're disturbing the spirits, we shouldn't be doing this. I have two questions about that. The first one is, do paranormal investigators, should they have some sort of, not religious, not spiritual, but some sort of gnosis regarding why spirits or ghosts should not be on this planet, to rationalize their work? Like, is that necessary? And also this, you know what, answer that question first, and then we'll go into that.
Definitely. Can I have you elaborate a little bit on what you mean?
Yeah, like, so for example, there are some people that when they get called in to deal with a haunting or an exorcism or whatever, um they're coming in with the belief system, with the rationale that ghosts, spirits, hauntings, demons, all that, this is not their realm. This is not where they're supposed to be. Now they
Oh.
can interact with it. There are comings and goings, don't get me wrong, but
Mhm.
in terms of the spirits who are trapped here, or who are what do you chose to be here due to their sort of desires and things like that, or traumas, it's, in a sense, it is against their nature. Like, they should be crossing over, they should be moving on. So is that necessary? Like, should people have these beliefs, or some kind of ethical thing about them, or can you go into paranormal investigation with just simply an open heart and just sort of take each case as it comes?
That is a fabulous question. And I'm kind of, um, though I am of the belief that it is the natural order that these spirits, particularly human spirits, need to cross over simply because of that's how nature works. I first and foremost believe it's important to view ghosts or deceased humans as people without bodies. And that's the only difference. These people have their own personal autonomy and their own wants and needs, their own reasons for being here. And I think first and foremost, we need to kind of have a conversation. Like, are you okay being here? Do you want to be here? And if they do want to stay there, then I think as long as they're not causing any problems, that should be respected.
Mhm.
I do think that it is important for them at some point when they're ready to cross over. But I think sometimes when people get that belief in their head, that causes this sort of need to enter all paranormal situations like an exorcist, like you're out of this house, move on. Everybody needs to move on. Like you cannot stay here. And it's like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like,
Right. There is a
Frank who
matter of
built
free
this
will.
house, exactly. Frank who built this house and doesn't cause any problems. He just likes to sit in the corner and hang out. He can stay.
Mhm.
Like that's not an
Right.
issue. As long as
Right.
everyone's cool.
So yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with that. I think that that's definitely the way to go. It's just so it's crazy because the paranormal investigation community is so vast in terms of like their beliefs, and like the groups are really different out there. Like if you were to
Mhm.
compare them and stuff like that, they're very very different. And I know, some of the groups that I've been involved in the past, there's this sense of like moral obligation to ensure that not only your spirit is being constantly elevated, but that we elevate other spirits. And so in a way, if we don't cross them over, it's almost like we're doing a moral injustice. We're not doing our part to help them
Mhm.
move into the space of evolution. And then you have other groups that are like, no, it's really just, it's first, take it as they come kind of situation. So I love that. I love your explanation. I think it's right on par. I really do. Now when we talk about misconceptions about some of these paranormal things, what are a few others that you've encountered? Like, what would you love to clear up for some of the people out here who are curious about your book?
Oh, I think it's really important that people understand that what you see on television is not paranormal investigation, it's para entertainment. And
So you're
those are
not
two
going
very
in
different
there
things.
poking fun at spirits and mocking them and all that.
And terrifying the people in the house by calling everything a demon.
Okay.
And no, that's not generally how it works. We don't provoke the spirits. I see a lot of people who just assume, and like the moment I started posting about this book online, I had people, mostly witches, suddenly be like, I will not be buying that because I don't care to antagonize the spirits. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And they're like, well, that's what you do in paranormal investigation. And I'm like, no, that's what you do on TV.
Right, right.
That's different. In fact, most of the paranormal investigation teams that I know have very strict rules against antagonizing the spirits. And if you do, you're often off the team. I know that that's one of the number one rules in our team is that if you're being disrespectful to the spirits, you have no business being here. And
Right.
so, and that's something that I find, fairly frequently in the paranormal communities that there are rules against that. And a lot of times paranormal investigators are there to try and just simply create opportunities for communication, not there to try and yell at them and challenge them to a fist fight or whatever it is that you're seeing on TV. So I want people to understand that real life paranormal investigation and what you see on television is very, very different. And
Yes.
I think that again, if we have problems with a spiritual area, the the answer isn't to just like cancel it. The
Right.
idea is to fix it. Like, okay, well, I don't like how that's being done. I have knowledge that might be helpful, so how about I get involved here? And that's what I kind of want to encourage people to do through this book, is like, you know what, we can actually, if you're seeing something that you don't like and you have information, jump in there. Like, let's do
Yes.
this together, let's be the change. And I think that that's really important. And I think if people start doing that, they'll begin to realize how different it is than what they thought it was.
So if we're not antagonizing the spirits, if we're not, cursing their names out, then how do you get the spirits' attention to interact with you?
By actually being a nice person that you would wanna talk to. It's the same thing like making friends, because again, as I say, these spirits are people. And if
Yeah.
someone walked into your house and is, like, making all this noise, you'd go and you'd hide somewhere, right?
Right.
Like,
For
versus, like,
sure.
if someone, like, was like, "Hey, do you mind if I come in? I just wanna talk, like, real quick. Like, I'm not here to, like, do anything, but, like, I wanna see if you need help." And often, a lot of the times when people call a paranormal team like mine, it's because they're experiencing paranormal disturbances. And if they're experiencing paranormal disturbances, the reason for that often is a spirit is trying to get someone's attention.
Mm.
And so if you can show up and be like, hey, I hear you've been trying to get people's attention. Can you tell me what's wrong? Sometimes either they need you to get a message, maybe they're like really confused. They're like, this is my home. Why did these people move into it? I'm still living here because they don't know that they're dead.
Mm.
And so they need someone to talk to. They need someone that they can have a conversation with and kind of figure out what's going on. One of the movies I go back to a lot is The Others. Um,
That's a great
Spot
movie.
on of what it's like often to be dead and not know it, and kind of like have people in your house.
Yes.
So yeah, that is something we run into.
Speaking of, different types of haunting and different types of spirits, how often do you come across an actual sentient being versus, let's say, a person who is, going through trauma, going through a tough time, and is sort of creating, if you will, some disturbances within their home due to their own emotional irregularity. So, like, how do you? What's the ratio in those situations?
Um, hmm.
Because I know for me, it's usually a person. It's usually
Mm-hmm.
when I go into a space, the first thing I notice is the person's energy in that space. You know what
Mm-hmm.
I mean? Almost like it doesn't fit right.
Mm-hmm. Yes. It's an interesting question because I do find that most places I go to have a spirit involved. Though that spirit is not always the culprit of the haunting. So for instance, I will often go into homes and there will be spirits there because spirits are everywhere, dead people everywhere. And so, you know, I walk in, there's some dude who's dead, making a sandwich in the kitchen. And I'm like, what are you doing? And they're like, no, I'm just hanging out. Like, okay. But the actual activity may not be caused by the spirit. That spirit, they may
Ah,
not even know that that spirit is there. The activity may be caused by a person. So I do find that these spirits are fairly frequently around or present, but not always the actual causer of the disturbance. It kind of depends. I find that we kind of go through like cycles a little bit. Sometimes we'll have like a lot of spirits and then we'll have like a lot of poltergeist. And so for those of you who don't know who are watching, when people create the hauntings themselves based off their own, either like really intense, energy that they're throwing out, or something that they're going through, or maybe their age, we call that a poltergeist when a person creates the phenomenon themselves. And that kind of depends on a few factors. I'm with you. Sometimes you walk in and you're like, okay, I'm not feeling an active spirit here, but there is a lot of energy. And that's probably, and especially if it's an energy like anger or a whole lot of sadness or something like that. It's like, okay, this might be caused by something that they're going through. Or something that I get a lot is because in my questionnaires, I often ask, oh, are there children involved? Because if you're experiencing a really intense haunting and there are little kids there, I want to move it up towards, a higher priority on my list.
yes.
And I
Oh, I'm
had,
so glad that you brought that up, by the way. The
yes.
assessment, brilliant. And
Yeah.
that is something that is so necessary. So, 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 so necessary. Making sure that your clients are psychologically all checked out, family, medical, all that needs to get
Mm-hmm.
checked out prior to, doing a run through of the space, history, all
Mm-hmm.
that. And I'm so glad you put that in the book.
Definitely, because it's important because not only does that help you weed out whether or not this person needs paranormal help versus psychological help, but also a lot of the times it will tell us information about the haunting. So for instance, are there children involved? Yes. Okay, great. What are their ages? Well, I have 3 daughters. They're 10, 11, and 12. Oh, I think I might have found the reason for your haunting a little bit. Or, what's happening in the home right now? Well, we have these 3 daughters and we're going through a massive divorce right now. That's very ugly.
Mhm.
Oh, I have found the source for your haunting before I even show up. So, like,
Yes.
that information is very helpful. Or even times like people who are having mental health issues or mental health crisis, such as like really intense depression, anxiety, different types of paranormal phenomena or spirits will be drawn to that because
Yes.
for them it's food. Things like sadness, things like anxiety, these emotions, this energy that's coming off is food, and
Mhm.
so they get drawn to that. And so it doesn't mean that just because this person has anxiety that they're not haunted, or just because they have this depression doesn't mean that they're not haunted. But it also doesn't mean that just because I go in there and get rid of the ghost that they're going to be healed magically. We need
Right.
both. We have to go from both
Exactly.
angles.
So you're basically saying the witch part of
Hmm.
paranormal investigation may oftentimes be referring someone to a therapist or giving someone a prescription of a cleansing or
Hmm.
offering, protections and clearing of the home
Yeah.
versus actual, needing to come in with all this and that. Sometimes it's just that
Hmm.
simple. Well, not
Yeah.
it's not that simple, but
Well, like with like the poltergeist thing, I once it's very common for me to come in and have a really messed up family dynamic that is causing all this tension. And I'm like, you guys don't need bells and smoke. What you need is a family therapy, like
Yes.
ongoing is what you need. And that will fix your paranormal issue.
Yes.
So you have to be ready to do both. And that's why when you're doing this work, when you're out there in the paranormal world, if you come across people who are also doing this work who are therapists, get their cards,
Mhm.
because a lot of times people who are experiencing paranormal issues are afraid to go to a therapist and tell them there's a ghost in my house because they think that they're going to be committed immediately.
Right.
But you'd be surprised at the number of therapists who actually believe or who have experienced something themselves. I have a friend, my friend Meg is a therapist, and she specializes in trauma after experiencing a haunting.
Wow, that's
And I think
beautiful.
that that's really important because who are you going to tell? Like, I
Right.
saw this thing with teeth and bat wings in my bathroom, and I'm completely sane, but this is something that I encountered, and I need to unpack this with somebody. Like,
Yes.
these are things.
And that just goes to show just how important your role is as a paranormal investigator. It seems like all fun and games and technologically, there's a lot of fun little tools and props to work with.
Mhm,
But at the end of the day, you're dealing with people's lives, you're dealing with people's
mhm,
family, you're dealing with people's mental health, you're dealing
mhm,
with people's dead loved ones who, might be coming through. So there's just so much there
mhm.
that, you have to have a level head for. And I'm so
Right.
glad that this book really does a thorough job covering all of this. My question too is your take on demons and evil
Mm.
spirits. What experiences have you had with that, if any?
So my specialty on my paranormal investigation team is negative entity removal. So whenever, because so my team is mostly made up of psychics. We're a little strange in that way that we have some investigators, but we're mostly psychic mediums that all work together.
Yes.
And so we each kind of do a lot of different jobs. Like, okay, if you can move on these ones over here, you go do that. And anytime they're like, yeah, I definitely came across Satan in the basement. We're gonna send Jay down. And I'm like, great, cool, thanks. That's kind of what I do is the negative entity situation. And I have run across some very strange, very scary things in my time as a paranormal investigator. I have never once come across something that I would call an Abrahamic demon, like a biblical demon. Never come across that. They have other things to do, like than
Okay.
hang out in some kid's closet somewhere in like rural Oregon. That's just not what they do. That's just not what they do. As a Catholic, I do believe in possession, and that's a thing, but that's a whole different ball game than something that you would
Totes,
find
for sure.
here.
So
Um,
what kind of evil spirits then? Like, is it more like pests and like little
mm,
tricksters and things like that they normally pops in and out?
so I love that we're kind of like also having this conversation about the idea of evil as well,
Yes,
because I
yes,
find that it's
yes, please
often right. That's
educate.
well, that's often it's such a matter of perspective,
Yes.
and so. I always talk about kind of like spiders and flies, right? To the fly that is stuck in the web, that spider seems pretty evil, right? But
Yes.
from our perspective, standing outside, spiders got to eat,
Yeah.
right?
Spiders be
Spider is just
spideying.
doing, yeah, the spider's got to do what spider's got to do. And like, sorry, fly, but like, I got to eat you. This is just how it works.
Yeah.
And I find a lot of the time when it comes to these entities that we're dealing with, they're not there because they love being malicious. What they are there for is food. This is how they eat, is they feed on fear. And therefore their natural processes are to create fear in there, is to come into a home that they find, that they feel like would make a good place for them to be, and then they create a lot of things that create fear in the
Mhm.
family around them in order to get food.
Mhm.
And that's not fun for the family or for the
Right.
people that are experiencing it or for anyone who is having that attachment. That is not fun for them. But I rarely find that I feel like it's something that is evil. I
Mm.
definitely don't get a warm, fuzzy feeling from it.
Right.
Um, but also, that's part of it, is that they need to create fear so that we release this energy that they use as food.
As food. So the
And
paranormal investigators are kind of like the raid for these like
a little
ghostly
bit.
cockroaches.
Yeah, a little bit. And so I find a lot of the time that out of anything, like, I mean, forgive a Harry Potter reference at this point in time, but the Bogarts that know like the fear and then they feed off of your fear. But if you can make them funny in some way, I find that the power imbalance shifts enormously, which
Yes.
is why, like in the book, I talk about a kind of a rather scary entity that I come across quite frequently that I have named Clyde. Because it's kind of a funny, silly name and it kind of humanizes him. And therefore, I feel a lot less fear, as opposed to being like this entity versus be like, oh, yeah, that's Clyde. There's another one that I come across a lot that I call Carl. Like whatever you can do to kind of bring down that fear level makes them a whole lot less powerful. And so it's not necessarily an evil thing so much as it is a nature thing. And I find that,
Yes.
you come across like standard negative house entities. They call like a domestic house entity that is just there doing its thing. You also have things like the Hat Man, which is Clyde, that we see quite frequently. And he often shows up, especially when people are experiencing a lot of depression
Mm.
or a lot of anxiety, because he seems to like that energy a lot more. So
Mm.
we'll run across him there, or sometimes in places where a lot of heavy drug use is
Mm.
happening, you'll find Clyde. Um,
Have
so
you
it can,
encountered issues with like land spirits or people not respecting the land and having some
mm,
issues with that?
absolutely, absolutely. One of my, and let me tell you, I would rather any day go up against a negative entity in someone's closet or under their bed or whatever, as opposed to a disgruntled land spirit.
Mhm.
Land spirits do not play. They have been here since the dawn of time,
Yup.
and they are old and they are weird. And no, thank you. So we had a case, and I talk about this in the book, where some guy built this beautiful, beautiful house in in Lower Washington, in kind of like this foresty area. And in order to build his house, he had to cut down a lot of trees to make room for it.
Mm.
And when he contacted us, he included in his email a picture of something. We're still to this day not sure what it was, but it looked like something had come up onto his porch, like right in front of his door, thrown up a bunch of blood and like some creature part, something there. And I'm like, okay, first of all, no, no. Um, And we weren't able to get out there for like another like 2 weeks because we had to like, everyone has a schedule. Okay, I can go on this day, I can do that day, whatever. So like 2 weeks later, we show up there and he's like thrown away the thing, but he's left the blood. And it's like summer, so it's pretty hot and it's still wet. And that's often an indicator that something is going on. That blood should have been dried
Wow.
up, should have been like crusty. No, it
Yeah.
was still wet.
Wow.
And the things he was talking about seeing at night, things looking in the windows, things that were kind of like hanging around the house. And of course, I'm the one that they're like, cool. So do you want to go like walk around in the woods for a minute? Tell us what you see. And I'm like, oh, great, of course. That's what I do on the team. But yeah, I was just like, no, no. So land
Gee.
spirits for sure will get involved in hauntings.
Now, when we talk about, I came across a situation one time, and I'm curious to know if this is what you meant in the book. So I came across a situation one time where a haunting was not necessarily a haunting in so much that it was the fractured parts of a living person, the fractured spirits of a living person that was haunting a childhood home, and that's why that's why that part of that spirit was fractured, and so they went back to that home. And it was a situation in which we had to have contact with the curandera that was with her to ensure that the ceremony was done to reintegrate that fractured spirit, but for us to sort of send it away. So it was like a whole thing. And I'm wondering,
Mm-hmm.
is that what you meant in your book about fractured spirits, like in terms of like pieces of a spirit being somewhere and or more than one location?
Mm-hmm. That is fabulous that you bring that up. So your situation here is a bit unique because the person that you're working with is still alive.
Yes. It
And
was
so
wild.
but you have a soul piece that is somewhere. And and that happens for all kinds of reasons. Maybe this was the house that they grew up in where maybe they experienced abuse, and so like this abused child part of themselves is still there.
Yes.
Things like that. And I didn't go into that necessarily in the book, simply because there is, when we talk about these sicknesses where soul pieces go missing, like in susto or espanto,
Mhm.
where these pieces kind of flee. I didn't. First of all, I'm only allowed a certain amount of words in
Oh my
these
god, I know.
books,
It's a whole thing. It's a whole
and
thing.
and also I don't think, at least at this time, that I have enough education on a topic like soul piece retrieval
Right, right, right.
to go into that in this book. But Erica Buenaflor has an amazing book on soul retrieval specifically, from a curanderismo perspective. That is wonderful. In the book, what I talk about, though, is a very similar thing that happens, where when spirits go through the light, sometimes the light will reject pieces of them because they're not part of that actual soul. It's something that is acquired. So,
Mm.
for instance, like no spirit on the other side has mental illness, but when a person dies and stays here in this plane and is a ghost here, they can retain that mental illness here.
Yes.
And then when they go through the light, that's something that they've acquired here in this life
Right.
and isn't part of their soul essence. And so the light's like, absolutely, you come through, that stays over there because it kind of acts as a filter. And then that
Exactly.
piece of them gets left behind.
Yes.
Similarly, things like addiction. So people who have been around people who are addicts will say, like, well, when they're using, they seem like a completely different person
Mm.
than when they're sober. And so that sober part of them is kind of like what their spirit really is, and that's what goes through the light. But then that sort of alternate personality gets left behind. And
Mhm.
sometimes it's just little pieces. So it might be someone's sadness, it might be a piece of trauma, it might be their anger over something that needed to be released for them to go on to the other side where they're supposed to be. And sometimes those little pieces don't really do much. They just kind of, maybe they dissipate, or maybe they can cause a little bit of mischief. They might, cause, certain emotions in a home if they're left there. But a lot of times they just kind of dissipate. Or if there's enough of them, they might find one another and join together and create a spirit. Or if
Mm.
it's big enough, like someone's mental illness or their addiction, once it comes off, it's kind of like this person's shadow that
Mm.
is then haunting a space. And that person has already moved on, but this piece of themselves that they've acquired and have been living with stays behind. And
You've encountered that and so in those situations, because it's a piece and it's not really a sentient situation, would that be considered, a residual piece of a haunting, or would that just be considered just simply a fractured piece of energy that just needs to be cleared out, like a cleansing versus a crossing over?
So a lot of the times, kind of depends. Sometimes you can get the light to accept it again if you try again.
Mhm.
But I find that's pretty rare. However, I do find that if you're working with a fractured piece, that's a piece that needs healing the most. And
Right.
so things like this different personality of someone who is, you know, in the throes of addiction, that addiction is on top of something that hurts underneath.
Mhm.
And it's so if you can get to that thing in the middle and you can talk to it, and again, this is where that counseling spirits come through, talk with them and kind of be like, why does this hurt? Like, you don't have to hurt anymore. Like, and
Right.
then once you can kind of, they'll kind of unravel and they'll dissipate. Other times they're not interested in talking. And at some point you have to just kind of be like, okay, cool. We're just going to cleanse and just get rid of it that way.
Yeah.
It's not my favorite way to do it, but sometimes you have to do what you have to do depending on where you are and kind of, what's available. So,
Exactly. So we are approaching towards the end of our life, and I wanted to ask, are you working on any other new projects? I mean, I know this is a pretty new book, so we don't want to jump the gun here, but you've just been on such a roll lately, and you've been doing lots of interviews. I'm just like, when are you going to be on TV? When are you going to, So, what's going on? What's your goals for 2023?
well, I am working on a couple of things. I am contributing a chapter to a book that's coming out. I'm not sure how much I'm allowed to say, but I am contributing a chapter to a new book that's coming out. Um, I I do have another book brewing in my brain.
Yay!
The hard part is, okay, how do I want to handle this one? Because apparently, and this is not intentional, but apparently my thing is, oh, these two worlds that shouldn't go together, let me just smash them together, because I really think that they do go together. We're just not looking at it correctly. So I may have another one of those in the work, which will hopefully kind of maybe open some people's minds.
Well, you know
Maybe
where to
so we'll
send
see.
it when it's time.
Yeah. Absolutely. So yeah, I would expect more from me in the future.
Well, I do want to ask with regards to this current book, The Witch's Guide to
Mhm.
the Paranormal. Someone who has never done this before, has only really had the experience of what they've seen on TV. Maybe they have a few friends in school that have a tape recorder or their phone and they just want to go to an abandoned house. What would be some tips or some advice? Aside from bringing your book with them on the road, because that's definitely a must, would you give them?
That is a great question. First of all, make sure to just scan through the protection section of the book just to make sure you have a little bit of protection going on, little shielding happening. Remember to make friends with the spirits, don't antagonize them. Make sure to leave the space as you found it, if not better. So a lot of times people go to places, especially like an abandoned house, they
Oh my
immediately show
god.
up and decide, cool, I'm gonna,
Spray
spray paint
paint.
this wall or something like that. I mean, so that's not something that you want to do. Just, have respect in general. And my number one tip for anyone doing paranormal investigation is to follow my personal motto, which is paranormal starts with P. So go potty before you do your paranormal investigation. Because
I was not ready for that.
if something jumps out at you, and if you have not already gone and peed, you may pee in the middle of the investigation. So that's the first thing I do when I get to a place. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go to the little investigator's room because I deal with the scary stuff. And if I open this closet and something says boo and I pee myself, then I lose all credibility. So
Oh my
you got
god.
paranormal starts with P.
I was
Very important.
I was not ready for that. That is the best. And how can people reach you? What's your social media handles, emails, websites, any of that good stuff?
Absolutely. So everything that you can definitely find me on Instagram. That's kind of my main place right now. Where you can find me. I am at Oregon_wood_witch. Make sure you've spelled it correctly and there's not a 0 in there or something, because a lot of people are pretending to be me right now.
You're
So
famous. That's
find
what happens. That's what
I'm
happens.
so famous. So definitely find me on the Instagram. There's a link in my bio and it does things. So if you click the link in my bio, it will take you places. Things like where you can book readings with me or spell services with me. Or if you're like, you know what, I think my house is haunted, I'm not sure. I offer a house reading where you send me pictures of your home. I tell you what I'm picking up psychically from a distance. I also do spiritual coaching. So if you're like, I want to learn how to do something, or like I've started learning this, but I've reached kind of a weird snag in it, or you just want to ask me questions, spiritual coaching is great. Sign up, have some time with me where we can sit down and chat. You can tell me what it is you're trying to learn. I can help you. I think of it as kind of like witchcraft tutoring. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I love that. And so, okay, time out though, time out, because you said distance reading
Oh, yeah.
with a picture. I'm curious about this because there's a hot debate going on online, and I'd love to hear anyone and everyone's perspective on it. But the hot debate is: can we do magic? Can we heal? Can we do divination? Can we perform rituals? Anything like that online? Or from a distance from their client or from the people in their groups. What's your take?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is magic, isn't it? I mean, that the things like time and space are all things that's like magic 101 is disregarding time and space. And that was something that we had to learn how to do because
Yes.
the pandemic hit and then we couldn't go to
Yes.
anyone's houses,
Right.
but people were still having paranormal problems. And so I had to learn to be very good at um, cleansing someone's home with like just like me and my Saint Michael novenas, like, but we
Yeah.
actually had a great amount of success doing it from a distance, which was really wonderful. And
Yeah.
something that we do as a team for, I mean, even before the pandemic, is we do something we call pre-impressions. So before we go to the house, I have this hair. It's just gonna
You
be
look
messy.
fabulous, darling.
I've been fighting with it the whole time. We do something called pre-impressions, which is before we're not given any information until we show up at the house. So we're only
Mhm.
given like an address the day of, and we show
Okay.
up there and then we do our psychic walkthrough and then we tell people what we figured out. But those of us who have been assigned to the case will get either like a case number. If people don't want pictures, some people just get like the case number and then use that. I utilize pictures, and then we go through without speaking to one another, and we write down what it is that we're picking up in the
Mm.
home, and then we send them all to our case manager, who's the only one that gets to see all the psychic's notes. And she's
Okay.
like, it is fascinating because we don't talk to one another, but we often get the same things or pick up the same kind of
Wow.
information. We
Yeah.
did have, we did add an animal communicator, a pet psychic, to the team. And at first I was and I know this woman, and I'm like, well, she's very talented, but what is she going to do on a paranormal team? Let me tell you, like a week later,
There are
we
tons
had,
of dead animals that
right? Well, like we had a case like a week later, and we're doing pre-impressions, and she nails it. She nails where they live, how many people are in the house. Like there's a blonde woman and there's a man with the black hair, and there's blah, blah, blah. Like all the living people in the house and all the paranormal things that they're like, all the details, because she talked to the family's dog. And the
Oh my
dog gave her
god.
the tea.
What? Oh
So
my god.
distance is a thing that does not really matter when it comes to this stuff.
The dog.
That dog was like, "Let me tell you."
Be like, "Girl."
Yes. Yeah.
Shit's been stressful up in this mother. Oh my god.
It really
But
has.
I can't. That is so much fun. That is too much fun. I have to say, Jay Allen Cross, thank you so, so much once again for saying yes, coming on my show, spreading your wisdom, and just chatting. Just chatting.
Absolutely.
Let's give a shout out to a few of the people that are in the chat room right now. Wendy obviously is just so happy to be here, and she's an amazing entrepreneur, witch, curandera, all the things. We have David, we have Tina, Steven, a lot of great people here. Sania, thank you guys so much. Paradox, for coming live tonight. And by all means, ask your questions. We'll have a great time answering them. And for those of you who are watching the replay, thank you so much. And make sure that you reach out to J. Allen Cross with any of your questions. And make sure, most importantly, you get this book. You guys seriously need this book. And also, too, like, look, it's not that big. Like,
Right.
you
It fits in your
managed,
bag.
yeah, you managed to jam pack a lot of information in a very small amount of space. So kudos to you on that one, for really reals. You know.
Thank you.
Again, thanks so much. Thank you. It is
Thank you.
Sunday night. Make sure you check us out every Sunday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time right here on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitch, all the places at The Magical Solution. And remember that this is how we grow, you guys. Have a beautiful night. Yay!